For the PressCorps, I'm Geoffrey Jennings, and I'm joined by Foxhole Lead Developer Mark for a one-on-one Q&A. Mark, thank you for taking the time off the clock to do this, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the reason why we're doing this one-on-one instead of the usual Zero Dark PressCorps live call-in show is because Mark said the devs wouldn't be able to do another one until late August because of how busy development is. And with so many questions floating around, the PressCorps thought something was better than nothing at all. So the PressCorps pulled together some topics that we thought would be interesting and opened up the question order to a community poll on the subreddit, which last I checked is going to be what we have now. Or I had some like existential ones here, not existential, but just like technical ones and like just all of that. And we'll get to those. But the first one, of course, was bridge fights. I don't know if that was like a meme answer inadvertently. I mean, I did include it. We did include it in the list, so it's fine. But hey, bridge fights. They have long been joked about among the community, but the frustrations are a common undercurrent. It seems no matter how much manpower and material is lost over whatever amount of time, players just seem to be attracted to these narrow, static kill zones that become huge supply sinks. So with that being said, what are the developers' thoughts on this phenomenon, on bridge fights as they currently exist?
Yeah, I think that we're okay with it to some degree. I think they can be made more interesting. Um, I hope that in the past we've updated the bridges, and hopefully in some cases that helped a little bit, maybe like by 10%, 10-15%.
Yeah. A little dynamicism, there's two levels now that you can
it's a
narrow
little
kill zone in.
Yeah, and there's like three types of bridges, and they're not all the same. So at least when you get there, there's different things. But I really think there's more interesting things we can do. Like, I wish you could build on them. I wish that you can leave a tank, like if a tank blew up on a bridge, if it can remain as a husk, and you can kind of, especially on the long ones, it's pretty brutal to have to like cross the whole thing without being able to build any cover, or it's just not as dynamic as it can be. But it's, I think that it, in some ways, there's usually in the world there's like two or three of these happening, and then in other places they're not. So I think if it was if every front was like that, it would be a lot worse. But for the ones where it's happening, there's a stalemate, and like it might not be the worst thing in the world for like new players that they just kind of want to go somewhere that's more stable for a while, right? But I don't think that like I do think they can be more interesting. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the interest just seems to be there's a difference between throwing men and manpower material at a broken bridge. First of all, a broken bridge doesn't even deter people. They will on both factions. I have tried to rally like, hey, let's just not attack here for a second. Truthfully, people just want to shoot things. That's like something that people just always want to do. That's one of the main differences that you will never encounter, or you will never it'll be very, very difficult to overcome in terms of designing a war simulator that's still a video game, is that people just want to shoot things. So wading the water and like clearly going into a death trap, people just do it. And it hurts to see from like a leadership standpoint, but particularly a logistics standpoint. So I don't know. Do you think that's something that needs to be discouraged at all? Or is it really just more so an interesting, just how interesting that engagement is? Because I guess, yeah, I think most people would agree that in a bridge fight, that's just a meat grinder, absolute meat grinder. That's less interesting than an open 100, 200 meter field that can be configured with trenches, foxholes, and wide open flanking positions. That's still a meat grinder, but at least it's player driven.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that I don't like. I think that they might be desirable from the standpoint of them being like strategic areas. Like players tend to once they can sort of push the enemy to a bridge point, they can kind of take a breath, right? Like, okay,
Mhm.
we've we pushed. If you're kind of pushing in an open field, you feel very insecure about it because you're like, okay, we don't build tons of bunkers here. The moment that the enemy does a counterattack, there's a big risk. But I think in a lot of cases, players like to push. I don't know if like is the correct word, but strategically it's a it's an anchor point that they can say, okay, we pushed it all the way to this bridge. We can take a breather. Maybe I can log off, right? For the people who care a lot, right?
Right.
Um, Knowing that like even less experienced players are capable of holding a choke point at a bridge, where less experienced players, it'll be a tall order to like hold down a wide open area. A funny side note about the bridge fights: the very first version of Foxhole, um, which was called the combat prototype, started off with a bridge fight because it was basically this tiny. It was like I don't even know if it's you can call it a map. It was like this tiny fragment of a map. There were two outposts, like the equivalent of, I guess you can call it a fob,
Mhm.
but it wasn't really even one. And in the middle, there was a bridge. And if you go online, you can on YouTube, you can find videos of this. And at the beginning, the first build, the corpses never really went away. So the
Oh,
bridge was just like a million corpses on it,
that
and you
sounds
could
awesome.
barely. But you should go look for it afterwards. It's really funny. But that's been there. That's been there from the beginning, and um, it's not that bad anymore. Maybe we can all be at saying like, okay, it's not that bad anymore.
Yeah, it's it's like the problem is the need to constantly attack, and there's it's like a necessary evil in some ways. It's been described that way plenty of times because bridges exist in the real world, and those are interesting military aspects. Just look at I don't know Operation Market Garden, for instance, but and many other examples. But at the same time, just the flow of the game. Um, it's just interesting how everything winds up at a bridge fight sometimes. You know what? I don't think I don't think it's a secret that more regions are coming, more maps are coming in some form or another. Will bridges be downplayed in future maps, or is it just the same, or are you going to add more of them?
I think it'll be about the same.
About the same, huh?
Um, yeah, because there are like you know there's this whole like in terms of the pacing of the war, it is important to have these checkpoints. Otherwise, it'll be really easy for like one side to just steamroll the other side. It's sort of, again, it's not just for if you're attacking, you can have a checkpoint, but if you're getting steamrolled, there's these points where it's like it kind of slows it down a bit. And, everyone has their own opinion on this. Some people are like, no, we should, we should have one side should have free reign once you're on the attack, you can steamroll everything. But I think that it's a pacing thing, right? It's a chance for people to, you know, um, take a deep breath. And if you're being attacked, you can be like, okay, maybe we can hold the line here and hold it long enough that we have a chance to have a breather. Maybe we wait out the next day until, someone can do an operation and do a counterattack. But there's this pacing element that is important. It's not really obvious. Um,
I
like,
think yeah.
yeah,
No, you're absolutely right, and I think part of the problem is that this massive barrier or this natural checkpoint, the River Mersey, which cuts through the center of the map, the whole world map more or less, instead of there being two rivers, one that quote unquote protects or checkpoints the north and then checkpoints the south, instead it's dead center more or less. And it's just this big, massive checkpoint. So instead of there being a natural middle ground, or sorry, a middle ground that is not natural because it's technically a river, so that is technically natural. But instead of there being something that's player based, there we go. That's something that's player based, like an open field. And now that you have the trench system, and hopefully more building mechanics coming, I think there's a lot of room to lean on the building aspect and the player diversity aspect in terms of what they can do with these new tools that they have, and giving themselves more of a middle ground to like a player made no man's land as opposed to this natural checkpoint or this
Yeah,
this big river in the middle.
well, something I'm actually there is something I can offer here. Like I think something I would really like to see is um, being able to run wars in more different more different directions without worrying
Hmm.
about the constraints of the world right now. Because right now it's
Right.
like, okay, well, there's too many players. If we simply like this current war, if the war flipped like to go on live one, right? If the
Right.
world flipped, suddenly you support less players. So that that's why it's hard for us to change these sorts of things, especially now when the live one is so packed, and to be honest, even live two is quite packed these days. It's one of those. But what I would like to see is maybe there's still some bridge fights, but maybe it's not the same ones over and over again, right? I think that alone will really help a lot because there's you're not just hitting up against the same thing every war, right? I think ultimately I would see that, and I agree with you. Having more player built um, checkpoints is always better than these like hard coded ones that we have in the game.
Yeah, it's funny. It's
Um,
weird to say natural because technically it's a video game, but also it's supposed to be nature. But in any case, yeah, no, I think I think there's more to be said there. But we do have to move on. Actually, last thing is that the ability to create your own crossings or own ways to navigate around the bridges that aren't boats. So, for instance, pontoon bridges. Or bridge laying vehicles. Has there been any thought given to that, or does this conflict with the design choice to not allow custom roads?
no, we've thought about it.
Mhm.
The question is, how do you constrain it, right? So that's kind of an open question. Like obviously, if we just you just allow people to build it like anything, like any other vehicle, right? Um, you would you would just build them everywhere, right?
Yeah,
I
which is
mean,
why you
you've
don't
seen,
allow to build roads, right?
yeah, well, you've also seen people even try to build bridges out of like barges and stuff like that, right?
Right.
Um, so, but I don't know, like, how would you feel about player built bridges?
Yeah, I feel like they'd be spammed everywhere because knowing how I play is that if you gave me the ability to bypass a road, or sorry, bypass a bridge, I'm just gonna make my own bridge every time, and eventually I'll just create so many bridges there won't even be water anymore. I have terraformed using steel to just cross whole divisions of tanks over the river, therefore negating the point of the river. Which, hey, I put my own blood, sweat, and tears into that. But yeah,
Actually, I have
it'd be
another.
gamed. It'd be gamed.
Actually, I have another question, just to
Yeah,
just just follow up on that. How would you feel? And this is not what we're doing, just just to be clear.
this
But
is why I hate that we're not doing this live or as a call-in show. But yeah, go on.
how would you feel about like if the world was taken all the way in that direction and it was procedurally generated? How would you feel
Oh, I
about
would
that?
love that. I mean, it would be a mess. It would be an absolute like there would be lopsided, uh, just everything. But I don't know. Like you're talking about like a brand new 20, however how many maps are 27 maps? Like every war. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's say it wasn't even like, let's say it was a Foxhole like game, right? Like, let's just
Okay.
say like we went off and we were working on like another game, which we were not making another Foxhole game, but like, because, but the whole thing was like proc gen every time versus a handcrafted world.
I think that'd be great because that would force the player base to adapt to whatever they're given with. And obviously, there'd be debate
Interesting.
over what that algorithm is. I mean, we're kind of talking weather as well, right? The algorithm for weather, which well, hopefully we'll get to. But yeah, I think it'd be really cool because then there's no fights over. I mean, first of all, it's not stale, and then two, there's no big. You just kind of take what you're given, and you just have. I don't know. That's how I. There are people who really get into the nitty gritty of like how things are set up, and I'm more of the opinion that it's like. I mean, yes, bring it up, but at the end of the day, there's so many factors that you kind of have to just take what you're given to a degree. But yeah, that's how I'd approach it. I think it'd be cool. Yeah, I think we do have to move on though, kind of switching gears entirely, which is uniforms and cosmetics, which is the second subreddit poll. So full disclosure, the PressCorps has been granted the privilege of a special in-game character model provided by the developers. You can visit the PressCorps Discord's FAQ channel for more info on that. But first and foremost, are uniforms and cosmetics still on the table?
Yes. So that's something that uniforms is something that we want to do before 1.0. So it kind of falls under the category. So it kind of falls under the category of trades. It's just something that has to be done.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, but it's been this thing that we've been excited for so long, and players have been excited for so long. It's just like trades, right? We just have to do. It's just like if you look at the long list, right? There was like weather, there was like the trenches, there was these things that people kept asking for, right? Players kept asking for years, and if you pay attention, those big ticket items that just come up every other dev stream, they've been coming slowly, right? So it's like, if you ask for it enough, like, it's, I'm not encouraging people to just start asking for everything they want a lot, but
I mean, go for it. Go ahead, ask for everything. Just don't expect it. So that's on you. But yeah, so I don't know if you can spoil this, but oh yeah, go ahead.
I do want to say something though. Like, I won't say never, but I'm not a big fan of cosmetics in the way that it's done in a lot of games. Obviously, it's very clear that we're not into the microtransaction thing, so that kind of goes without saying. But I'm not really. The thing that's nice about Foxhole, and I would like to keep it this way for as long as possible, is that you can just play the game without worrying about all this extra stuff. Like, what's the thing these days in games when you go in and you're just bombarded with all this crap, like, like your daily quests, your mission XP, your like whatever, and there's just all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
this useless stuff. Now, see, in Foxhole, all the stuff, the plethora of stuff, you actually have to engage with. So it's a glut of stuff, but you have to do it to be able to play the game.
Exactly.
I'm half kidding, but also true.
So like we don't. But to your point, if we do that sort of thing, we want to do it the same way. It should be part of the game. It should be part of the logistics chain. It should be all part of that stuff. It shouldn't be this part of this meta. I like to think of it as these like soul-sucking features that all these games have now, where they're just made for you to come back over and over again. But that's the thing with Foxhole. If you leave for like 3 months and you come back, you don't lose anything. Like, you can just play, or you can not play. You can go play other games. You can come back, and nothing is there to tie you to the game other than if you want to play it. And I think for as long as possible, like, I don't want, like, but there's players that like that stuff. There's players that have asked, hey, can we have like a in-depth player progression system where we can earn all these like XP and levels and stuff like that. And I think that, like, we're gonna try to keep things as straightforward as possible, right? Let me
gaming
put
like
that way.
The good old days. So actually, let's get into the nitty gritty as much as we can, as much as you can spoil here. So the plan. So I think there's no question that the models, the character models, are there. In fact, that's how the PressCorps got their uniform, which is that you just had one lying around, and you have shown in dev blogs years ago that you had these things for like medic uniforms, scout uniforms, all that stuff. The question is just, how do you distribute it? How are players going to acquire it? I don't know how in depth you can go into that or at all, because that's the big question: is what is it going to be tied to level and rank? Is it going to be tied to equipment, or is it going to be tied to something else?
So we don't ever, outside of like very exceptional cases, we don't ever want to tie things like that to like how long you've been playing. Like, the thing that, the whole World of Warcraft, you're level 100, you have access to all this stuff that I don't. So it's not going to be that. I can say it.
So it won't be tied to level and rank.
That's what. Well, like, for the most part, yes. I wouldn't want to do something like that. I just want it to be.
Yeah, when you said length, right? It's not just so much like you get. Let's say you're in a regiment and you just get this torrent of commands every day. You're not suddenly just going to have a fancy general's hat and all that stuff, just like that, right?
Yeah, like I mean, I don't know. See, I think so. I don't think there's okay right now. There's no plan. There's no plan to do anything like that. I'm
Okay.
not opposed to like one-off cool things. Like, hey, if we decide that, you know, just
Hmm.
making things up. If there was some sort of like officer's uniform that like a regiment leader or something can like wear, like something like that,
Yeah.
where there's like, okay, there's a little bit of like specialness there, because if you were like the regiment leader of like 500 people, and we
Right.
wanted that to be a bit special. But I think that's probably as far as we'd go. Like, I wouldn't want something like, okay, now everyone just wants to get this thing, and then everyone has to like make a regiment, and we're gonna force everyone to like play the game for 1,000 hours before
Right.
they,
Right.
like,
Right. So you're
that's not
in.
gonna make it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're entertaining the notion that you might copy the model that you gave the press corps years ago, which is that if a regiment, I guess, meets some metric, that's for you to decide because that opens up a whole can of worms, as I'm sure everyone is immediately imagining. But if a regiment or a group or anything does something, meets some metric, you would give them some sort of unique
So
cosmetic.
so that's not planned, like, as of right now. But
Right.
I, what I'm saying is that I don't. I wouldn't be opposed to an idea like that, right? So like that that doesn't violate all that stuff I was talking about earlier,
Okay.
because it's not about like just trying to solve someone and forcing them to play the game to earn this. It's more like, hey, it's cool if like they can have that. But if we were to do that, we'd probably think quite hard and long about it to make sure it we're not creating this system where everyone is going to just want to earn it and we're forcing them to jump through all these hoops. It would be more like, I don't know. See, that's why it's a bit like an open question. We'd have to figure it out.
Yeah, because at what
Um,
point do you say this X regiment gets their uniform? Also, officer's uniform, but what denotes an officer within that regiment? They
yeah.
decide
So
that
I
for
think
themselves. So
yeah. So that's that. I think probably the the bulk of how we do it is just how, if you think about where people get the uniforms in a real war, right?
mhm.
Like that's probably how we would do it first, and all that stuff we just talked about might maybe it sounds cool. Maybe we'll figure out a way to do it that way, or maybe we won't, right? So yeah.
Has there been any thought given to dynamic player models that show equipment? So if a player has an Ignifist on them and they put the Ignifist away, instead of it going into nothing, it's on their back. So that way you can always see, oh, that player has the Ignifist no matter what, as long as they
I
have it on
want to
their
do that.
backpack. You do want to
I
do
want
that.
to. I want to do that really badly.
Okay.
We've talked about it for so long, we just haven't gone to it. But I
It's
hate the fact that you can
yeah,
pull out like an RPG and nobody knew that you had it. That's so dumb to me,
I have to
right?
agree because there's a lot of tactical implications in that as well. Um, like
Exactly. So
hard gameplay stuff as well. And I think it's really cool. Um, and sorry, I was actually playing the game the other day, and yeah, just three soldiers just pulled out Ignifists. I was like, oh Jesus Christ!
I know. I feel like even your rifle, like if you switch to your
Yeah,
pistol, your rifle should be shown somewhere, in
I
my
agree. Yeah,
opinion. So
any
yeah,
equipment, as much equipment as you can. Well, I mean, the challenge here is that the player model is so tiny already that to
it
fit
is. But
anything.
I think it's like I think we can do it. Like it is tiny, but people will pay attention if they want to, and it'll be useful where it is, and where it's not, it just looks a bit different,
Mhm.
which it's harmless, right? So
Yeah. Last thing, talking about small differences here, in terms of so we talked about like regiment or player group custom made things as just as a possibility. Not just uniforms, but also cool things like flags or banners or emblems for their vehicles, maybe. Just throwing those out there as well. But so let's say you're climbing the ranks. Would there be any thought given to denoting a private who's brand new to the game or a major, and that being reflected in their character model or cosmetic or something.
Um, we've had a lot of conversations about this, and like
Even
I
just a
think
small
that
thing. Even just a small thing.
so
Like on the top of their helmet, there's the major symbol, and then for a private, there's no symbol.
so right now, yeah. So I think there's no plans to tie that to your your uniforms, right? But
Hmm.
I think you know there could be ways we can make it make it more than right now, where it just shows some like text beside your name. Maybe if there's like an emblem there or something. But see, I think that's the I think that's the it'd be really cool if you're it, everyone's gonna hate me for saying this, but if your rank can go up and down to some degree, but not through. I
Command.
know a long time ago. Do you remember the whole
Reprimands.
the rubber band? But not through that. More like the point is not to punish people, but the point is I wish that when people went in the because it's really cool right now if you're a new player and you see someone with a rank, I want them to feel like this is someone who's not only experienced, but they're experienced recently. Like they know what's going on in the game now.
Oh, would there be like a
And
time decay? Like if you don't log in for 3 months, your rank will lower?
see, that's the hard part because I don't want people to there's two conflicting goals here. On one hand, one goal is I don't want to force people to have to log in because that's not what Foxhole is about, right? You should be able to not play the game for a while, you come back, you don't feel like you lost anything. But on the other hand, I want someone to see someone and be like, this is a person who knows what the hell they're doing now. I want to listen to them, right? And that doesn't work if this person haven't played the game for 2 years, but they just have a rank, right? So um, that's what that's a problem that we want to try to solve is like how do you um, how do you do that without making it feel like all those other games that just force you to sign in every day, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's actually been some videos on that. I think Extra Credits has done stuff like that. Like for instance, World
Oh,
of
really cool.
Warcraft. I think World of Warcraft had a thing or does a thing where you get an XP bonus, and then that XP bonus withers away the more you play the game. And but that implies that there's XP. But we do have to move on to the single shard and trying our best to maintain it. So recently, here in War 80, Foxhole saw a massive influx of players similar to the large spike seen in February of this year. It stands to reason that once 1.0 is released, regardless of how much marketing the devs put out, just having that 1.0 on the front page of Steam, the entire gaming media, streamers, publications, YouTubers, will likely descend upon Foxhole in record-breaking numbers. The record currently stands at 5,682 simultaneous players just this past February, according to Steam charts. But 1.0 could possibly break into 5-digit numbers. Who knows? We do know that opening up as many shards as possible is an option, but, and here's the big question really. What steps are being taken to accommodate for a massive influx of players while maintaining the single shard? The big question there.
Yeah. So I wish we could fit everyone in one shard,
Of
but
course.
I'm not gonna bullshit anyone. um, that's a that's a limitation right now that we're gonna have to live with, right?
Mhm.
And we're gonna have to live with that for 1.0. So it's gonna be multiple shards. Like we've talked about this many times in the past, and we like um, we. I wish we could have everyone, but it's gonna be multiple shards, and to handle, I guess there's a few questions in there. I guess to technically handle it, we've done a lot of work actually in the beginning of this year. We spent a bunch of time making it easier and more robust for us to launch multiple shards. Like your profiles are synced now, so it's not this like
Mhm.
thing where you go in one shard, you might lose any
Right.
kind of progress. Because
Yeah.
again, going back to that goal, we don't want people to like
Yeah.
feel that way about the game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. We know that
Mhm.
the multiple shard 3, shard 4, shard 5, however many needs to be opened can be opened because that's just how it works out. But is there any progress being made or like in terms of like maintaining that single shard while keeping it like either pushing the engine, reconfiguring the regions, adding more regions? What's on the table here?
Yeah, I think most of the above. So I would like to increase server capacity, region capacity, right?
Mhm.
So we're always working on that front, and to illustrate that, like since we started, it's increased by since the very beginning. It's increased by almost 100%. I think over the last year, it's increased by probably 50%, like maybe 40 to 50%. I might be off by a bit, but it there was one point we put a lot of work into this over the last year, so it has increased. If players notice, like battles can be more dense now, right?
Mhm.
There are more players in certain places, so there is that front. In terms of map expansion, we thought about things like going wide, but that doesn't work because then you're always stuck with what you're stuck with right now. You're always going north south then, right?
Mhm.
So going wide is not really, in terms of regions, is not really an option. I think we have, this is like further out brainstorming type stuff, but we thought about the idea of like um, multiple, like different fronts, right? So like a different area, the equivalent of the Pacific and
All right, the Western Theater and the Pacific
Europe,
Theater.
yeah, the two
So that way,
the
like
two
Shard
theaters.
2, instead of Shard 2, it's just different continent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're not doing that anytime soon, right? But that would be like a potential option there. A lot of it, see, a lot of this stuff was like the thing that it's kind of mind blowing. But when we when we started, right, when we first started Foxhole, and I was myself plus Nuba. You might have seen him a
Hmm.
couple of times. He's been on stream a few times. So he's like the other co-founder of the studio. So he's not as public facing as I am, but he is really heavily involved in all like the major decisions and everything. When we were planning this out, we said to ourselves, I still remember the day we were planning this out. We were like, okay, our goal is if we can have 100 people in a server, and if we can maintain that, we'll be happy, right?
So now
That,
you're here.
that's all we that's all we wanted, and we said to ourselves, well, let's plan up to what might happen if there's 1,000, and that's all we need to plan for. Because if it's more than 1,000, well, that will be a crazy universe that I don't even know what to think. So we don't need to really like. We'll figure that out once we get there, right? And maybe that was bad planning, right?
Maybe
Um,
a little bit.
but like so now when we so now that we're here, we just we didn't think even now that we'd be at the players that we have
Yeah.
right now. So we thought, okay, maybe we go to 1.0, and maybe there'll be like 2,000 players, and our shard we'll be able to keep everything shard. So obviously this year a lot of that changed, and now we just have to figure it out, right? We just have to figure out like we've always done. So
Yeah, there's some crazy, but actually, like I like entertaining the ideas, which is just hey, just slap six regions north, six regions south, open plains. Just let because you have a trench system, let them run wild, buck wild, and now you have a lot more depth. So when the war finally breaks past the River Mersey, the front will be up north or down south for months or something. Another
I
one,
want to see that.
yeah.
So, oh,
Oh
sorry, I
yeah,
didn't
no,
mean to
actually,
interrupt,
go no,
but
please go
like,
off that.
see that's something that I've been really wanting to see for a long time. Because if you think about like the Eastern Front in World War II, right?
Just a
They went
massive, just
they went
grass.
all the way east, right? And then they
Hmm.
came all the way back, right? And the thing that frustrates me, that has been frustrated me for a very long time, is that the amount of space to move in is so small, and we just end up with these long stalemates. I would like to see that be longer, so that maybe what the hopeful thing is that like some of this we could loosen up on a couple of the stalemates a bit, but there's more room to go back and forth, and you don't feel like, because right now the feeling that I hate is, oh, one side takes like 2 3 regions, everyone's like, oh well, I guess the war's over. Right,
Hmm.
let's not try anymore.
Even
But I
with
wanted to feel
20, yeah, with 20, I keep going back to 27. Are there 27 regions? With all the regions that there are,
there's 23, yeah.
23, thank you. Even with 23 regions, it still feels small. This is like the largest the game has ever been for a while now, but still, it's so big, but it's also so small, and it's also leading back into the bridge fight problem, which is that yeah, things go back to the bridges, and for whatever reason, that's your world for like weeks at a time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like, I'm like sighing all the time because there's just all these things that I think can be so much better, and we're stuck, and we're bumping into all these limitations. Like, I want to be able to. The one thing that sucks right now, like this is something that I just totally hate,
Mm,
and there's other people on the team that feel the same way. I hate when the fact that you can't do a beach landing because a region is queued. You can't send the
that's the
fleet
worst.
past the region, and stuff like that is just like, we're going to constantly work on this stuff, and we want to lift these limitations. But man, like, step one, I want to see more depth so that people can feel like, okay, they took a couple of regions, they took 5, 6 regions, but that's fine. We can try to take them back, right? Or like maybe one side of the world it lost a couple of regions and then the other side didn't. But right now, it just feels like really cramped. It's like there's no, it's funny. This is the opposite problem. Remember before people were like, oh, if there's just too much space.
Yeah.
Now it's like, oh, there's no space to move. I just want to like do an operation there, but it's queued, and I don't, you know, yeah. But anyways, I don't want to be too negative about it. There's a lot
Yeah,
of good
well,
things. It's
yeah, but
exciting, right?
it's illustrating the limits that we've reached, and there's all going to be a lot of. I think there's going to have to be some sacrifices made at some point, but we'll see when we get there. Another crazy idea is I just like entertaining the notion is cutting regions in half, the border limits in half. That way, you could technically fit. So, like, if you cut, I don't know, Deadlands in half, border wise, like the technical limits
Mm.
of the border. So now instead of what is it, 200 players in Deadlands, you could fit technically 400 if you just cut Deadlands in half and do it in a way so that the shape isn't too weird. Uh,
Well, there's like insane technical solutions that can be explored,
mm,
and I don't think we're going in this direction. But there's ways you can do things like have what you just said happen in a dynamic way.
in real time.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, okay, there's too many people here. Let's split this up. But then you have other compromises, like, okay, now there's more like border travel, right? Or maybe even if you can overcome border travel somehow, something is going to have to give when you're interacting between two servers, right?
Right.
So yeah. But anyways, I'm getting into like the nitty gritty server tech
See,
stuff.
well, now I'm just thinking about two servers, and one faction has one server, one faction has the other, and there are bullets in terms of bits shooting between the servers. But yeah, I think it's
I mean,
yeah.
this is a problem we're trying to solve with like with uh with the new engine that we're working on, right? I
Mm.
know it's like we're we've told people that's not coming to Foxhole, but um that's why we started working on that, because early on, like 2 years ago, we started getting really frustrated by all these limitations. So we're like, let's just work on something that is going to overcome that, right? So
Foxhole too. Actually, yeah, just looking at foxholestats.com, excellent resource. Please visit that website. Honestly, like a seamless region, ideal region would be like 4 regions currently together seamlessly. That actually is what feels like should be a region. Um, where you put those, I don't know, but yeah, it's
so like less regions, right?
yeah,
But occupying the same space. Is that kind of what you mean?
right. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of ideas that can be entertained, and I think the community can do that for me. But those are some of the big ones, and yeah, I didn't even get into like logistics bottleneck, but I think logistics. I think you know full well just how bad that is. Okay, you know what? Actually, last thing about this topic, transfer bases, because one of the big problems with logistics borders or the queues is just logistics. Like, yeah, well, like, okay, we don't care that I don't get to go over there and shoot. I just want to get these vital supplies over the border and to the people who really need it. I don't need to go in the region. I just want the supplies there. So, like transfer bases, I know that was a concept years ago. I think. Any thought of bringing that back or something similar?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was an idea, and then it went on the back burner. I don't think it's. I think if we had to do it, it's not that hard. Like the border bases already have some sort of cross border interactions behind the scenes, just in terms of the logic of how they work. Like they need to know about each other and all that stuff. So you know, yeah, I think it's possible, and that's just one of those other things on the list, right? Yeah.
All right. And more maps, yes, they are coming at some point.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, I think that's confirmed. It's like trains. Like, yeah, they're coming. When?
Yeah,
All right.
I can try to be all secretive about it, but it's like, nah.
No, you can't. You really can't. All right, next thing here. The defensive and offensive traits of the factions. So can we get some sort of clarity on the offense and defense capabilities of the colonials and wardens? How unique should they be? Or should it be close, but with some small tweaks here and there? Like, what's your approach on this overall?
Yeah, most of that stuff is more along the lines of the theming, right? And like some of it trickles into gameplay, but I don't think our intention is to be like, let's somehow, like, at the beginning when we kind of talked about this, it sounded like, oh my god, like colonials are about artillery. Wardens are not going to have any artillery then. But it's like that's simply not the case, right? It's just when there's an opportunity, to design the concepts, design the theming, we put a lot of thought into like we do put a lot of the stuff that happens when we change how something looks and feels like. It's like, well, what would the colonials do? Why would they make it like this? And we use these things like, okay, wardens are more of a defensive faction, and colonials are more of an offensive, to resolve those types of things. And sometimes some of that trickles on into gameplay, but it's not like we're, again, with like the artillery thing, it's not like we're not going to give wardens any artillery. Right?
So it wouldn't be hypocritical to say, I mean, obviously. So, like, obviously, the wardens can go on offense and the colonials can be on defense. And if there's a vehicle that maybe contradicts that, it wouldn't be too hypocritical? Or is that something you want to crack down on in terms of approach? I mean, I guess there's a bit of subjectiveness there and how it's applied by the player base.
So, I think a really good I think a really good example of when something like that is used is the infantry support tank, right? You know how the players can like sit on the back,
right?
So we just felt like that was like a colonial thing, but it's like doesn't mean we're never going to do that on the warden side. We just thought that thematically that would be really cool to like start with, right? So I don't like. I didn't. Yeah.
The wardens get these nice posh seats, leather seats. The colonials just ride the tank.
Yeah, that more or less actually, right? So, yeah.
So I guess let me kind of rephrase the question here as well.
Okay, sure.
Maybe try like approach it from a different angle. How much better or worse is each faction supposed to be at their respective roles? Like, how much worse should the colonials be at defense, and how much worse should the wardens be on offense, and the vice versa of that? That's a big one. That's a real macro look at it, isn't it?
So I don't know, like I don't want to put a blanket statement like,
of course, and it's a blanket question.
Wardens are 10% this, and colonials are 10% that. So I don't. This isn't applying to everything, right? But if we're talking about like, let's say we were to give one side one type of a piece of equipment, like let's say a really I'm trying to think of an example, right? Let's say we ever introduce like rockets into the game or something, right? As an example, and we thought one faction was more thematically it makes sense that they would be better at using rockets. That they would use them more heavily, right?
Right.
I think like a 5-10% type of thing might happen where one side might get like rockets that might be more effective 5-10% more, right? But then we would try to look for somewhere else to make sure that like the other side is, 5-10% more effective at something else, and then we
Sure.
try to balance it out in that way. But I don't think there's some like across the board.
It's kind of
Wardens
a
are
silly.
10% better.
Yeah, it's a silly question, but silly phrasing of the question. Let's put it into something more concrete.
Yeah.
So like let's take a piece of equipment for instance. Hydra's Whisper, which is basically the Bangalore, right? It's a long tube. You put it down,
Yeah.
and it's supposed to be able to destroy obstacles. That's a colonial only piece of equipment, right?
Yeah.
So even though thematically that works for the colonials, and you are also depriving the wardens of that kind of tool. It could be a really cool and useful tool. So then, is that at what point do you say? So you take that example, and then the following question should be: if the colonials get that, should the wardens be really deprived of that? Is that where you draw the line in terms of theme and gameplay, or should the wardens get something similar? But then, how similar should that be? Let's take that example. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in most cases, okay, first of all, I didn't know anyone was desperately wanting Warded Bangalore, but anyways,
When you announced it, those are the things people were asking. Whether or not people use them, I don't know. But that's what's testing for.
I think in most cases we would want to give the other side some version of it that again might be some percentage worse or better, right? The Bangle, and then in some cases we just haven't gone around to it yet, right?
Okay, so yeah.
But like I won't like. You cited one case. Are there any other cases where the other side absolutely doesn't have any version of it?
I don't think any
the infantry support tank maybe, but you can argue maybe scout tank, right? Like they both have like the intel source, and they're both tanks.
So is it safe to say? So let's take let's phrase it like this: with the Hydra's Whisper, there are plans for the wardens to have something that can fulfill that role. Period. Like the wardens should get something like a Bangalore.
That one is such a special case that I'm trying to think. Like, I would say that outside of that, in almost every other case, we have done it, and we probably would. And I wouldn't like.
And going forward, we should expect there to be some level of equivalent.
Okay, so the reason why I'm not just saying a flat yes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm being all like difficult about it is because I don't want like that to hold us. Like, see, that's the thing. I have a hard time discussing hard and fast rules because I don't want that ever to like stop us from doing something cool. Right?
Fair enough.
So like,
sometimes it makes it sound inconsistent, but I understand that you need to leave the door open.
That's what I mean because like, okay, like here's the thing. My most likely answer is yes, right? Like, yeah, we if there's something useful and like it'd be nice if both sides had a version of it. But I don't want that. Like, if at some point in the future we thought something like, oh man, it makes so much sense if the colonials had like a uniform that was like this, and it would just like totally water it down if we had to like abide by some rule of like giving the wardens one too, right? Like, I don't want like. See, that's the thing. I know this stuff like frustrates people because, or maybe I won't say people, but certain players want everything to be the same. But like, that's where I have to not like agree, right? Like, I don't want things to be the same, right? Because that's not how a real war was, and it just takes a lot of away from a lot of cool possibilities, right? So that's why I'm always like, I don't want to say yes for everything.
And then last way we'll approach this kind of offensive colonials, defensive wardens is how emphasized or de-emphasized should these traits be at certain stages of the war? So, for instance, early war, how offensive should the colonials be in terms of their equipment? And I think this is another one of those general questions that you can just kind of go in any direction with. And then by late war, so like day 600, for instance, there's battle tanks out. I mean, when there's battle tanks, but there's battle tanks out. The whole tree's unlocked, short of rockets. Actually, the rockets that's kind of an equalizing force, where that thing is just so massive and such a world-changing thing that both sides have it equally, unless there's faction-specific rockets and super weapons, which would be cool. But I don't know. So, sorry, getting back on that topic, which is yeah, how emphasized should they be at the certain stages of the war?
Yeah, so I think what we want to shoot for, and this might not have been the case every time in the past, and some cases we might have fallen short of this, but we're fine with like I think some like power spikes at a certain point for each side is fine, right? And you can put some
Mm-hmm.
number on it, like 5-10%, or it again. These things are really hard to put an exact number on it, so I'm just saying something
Of
that
course.
is rough. But at the end of it, at the end of the tree, it's our goal, obviously, that both sides are as balanced as it can be, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
once it's exhausted, right? But I really want there to be more than just right now it's so tech tree focused, right? I want there to be things outside of that, right? Like I want
Right.
people to be able to chip away at things um, uh, beyond that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, I don't want this. I don't want that. I just think there can be more. Let's leave it at that.
All right, I think we'll have to as well. Last topic here, because we've reached an hour, um, is player. Because well, no one gave a crap about melee, so we'll just end it with player self moderation tools. So, Siege Camp's approach to in-game moderation, and correct me here if I'm wrong, but the approach to in-game moderation has been providing players the tools to moderate themselves first, and then coupled with a support ticket system as a fallback. Is that still the case? Would that be accurate?
um, I don't think there's so. I don't think that we want to take. Yes, like in the sense that there's not one approach that we're taking. We're not
Uh-huh.
like okay, we, all we care about is like self moderation, or all we
Right.
care about is like our moderation. I think we're just going to do everything that we can, right? To Foxhole is a unique game, right? Like that's the thing. Like there's no blueprint on how to do this stuff, right? So this is gonna sound like a generic answer, but it's the truth. Is that we just really have to do everything that we have to try everything, and we have to do everything that we can,
Yeah.
right? But I don't like. I would say that um, we do, even though we don't talk about it too much for obvious reasons. We do like um, we do put significant effort into um, moderation on siege camp's end, right? Like we're not just. I've heard people say this before, like, oh, well, they just expect everyone to self moderate. That's absolutely not true. Like we look at every support ticket. Each and every one gets read. Each and every one is investigated by someone on the team, right? So that like there there's someone on the team that or someone's right on the team
Mm-hmm.
that is responsibility. There's part of a team that's basically
Yeah.
working all that, and absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Foxhole.
just to make that clear,
Yeah, Foxhole, even though as unique as it is, and in many ways, certainly, I think in terms of moderation, I think there's a lot it can glean from other MMOs. And I think one of the most basic functions is just having more people to look at. So actually, who looks at tickets? Actually, it's obviously Max because he's the community moderator. But then do other people look at them as well? Are there other
no,
community
no, it's
moderators?
actually no, it's actually not. It's we have like we don't talk about this stuff because like we don't there there are people hired that look at this stuff, right? So, but I'm gonna leave it at that because I don't want like this is the kind of thing where it's like I don't want to get into things like oh certain team members looking at it, and then now when people are
Okay,
upset,
sure.
they're gonna go harass that team member, and
Right,
this is
right,
very
right.
terrible stuff, right? So like I'm gonna leave it at that, right? We have people on the team. The team looks at every ticket, right? And we'll leave it at that, right?
Are
So
so do you think the current team, without going into specifics, but do you think the current team that is dedicated to looking at tickets. Do you think that's enough manpower, or do you think there should be an expansion of that for that specific role? Essentially, hiring more people to look at more tickets.
I think we just need to scale that up as needed. If there's more tickets, then it's just like any other part of the game. If there's more players, we need more servers. If there's more players, we're gonna need more manpower looking at that stuff, and it's really just scales like every other part of the game. There's nothing special about it, right?
Right. So going back to the self-moderation then, just as a baseline, can you give us a frame of reference for what some of those tools are for self-moderating? So obviously, first and foremost, there's the report system, but are there, can you name some of the others?
Yeah, so there's a report system, there's a support 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 ticketing system. Um, yeah, I mean that's the main stuff. But we are looking into um, improving those systems too, because some of that stuff is, I think, definitely needs a pass, right? So what's there isn't what we think is ideal. So we are
What
working on
about
that.
then? Could you emphasize is not ideal?
Um, well, I would like to get to the point where I think I think that I think it would be good if there were there was more nuance to, let's say, like the report system, right? Like
Okay.
I think there should be, it shouldn't, when systems are like this, are binary, it doesn't allow for, you don't give people as much choice. Let's even take like a basic reporting system, right? if 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 all there is, let's say like it wasn't even Foxhole, right? It was something else. If all there is I can report this player and that's it, right? There was more to that in Foxhole, but I'm just using this as an example. You don't get a lot of information there. There's not a lot you can do, but
Right. You see, so you
so
see on the region chat, X player got reported for team killing. Okay, did they really team kill? Was it a friendly fire incident that went wrong? Was that person to blame, or were they really just team killing? Is it a back and forth?
yeah,
Yeah.
so exactly. So being able to give more information, having more nuance in the reports, and I also think another thing is giving. So it's not like, I think what's in an important place that needs a lot of improvement is, it's not only about, a lot of people are really focused all the time about like how do we catch people, right? Like how do we catch them? How do we punish them? But I think that's important and definitely should be improved and worked on. So 100%, right? And that's the obvious thing to work on too, right? Um, but the less obvious thing to work on is like how do you reduce the amount of misunderstandings as well, right? Because that's a big part of, I think, that is a problem, right? And I think that's an area that we want to improve, right? So a new player comes in the game, they don't know any better. They might do something that is going to agitate a veteran, right? Who might mistake that as a griefer, but they just don't know any better. Like, we have to look at things like, okay, well, how do we attack that on both ends? How do we make it so that a new player might be less likely to do something that is going to agitate a veteran on that end? And maybe that involves giving them more information. Like if they're about to enter a truck, it might say, "Hey, this truck has been recently used by some player." Um, you know, uh, and maybe it will like, cause see, even something as simple as that, right? Like even something as simple as that is, which, quite frankly, we should take a look at, we should take a look at that, and alongside some other things. It's like, even if we can resolve that one case, and that's already a lot of cases, right? If you think about it every day,
Yeah.
right?
Also,
Even if we solve this,
yeah.
even if we solve this case of that, then they might be like, oh, okay, I guess I shouldn't take this, and then they might not take it, and then there's no misunderstanding, and because there's misunderstanding, there is
It's a
no
comprehensive
team
thing,
kill.
right?
Right?
It's intersectional, right? So it's not just, hey, fix the report system. It's intersectional in that if you just if you add in small little things that reduce the amount of misunderstandings, then there'll be less need to just use the report system at all.
Well, plus, I think it's not only giving like it's not only on that end, but if I can finish that thought, right? It's on the other end too, right? Like you know, more things like the stockpile logs is something that I don't see with all this stuff. You don't necessarily know if it's a good solution until it's there, right? Because it can create other things too. Let's say, for example, if we were to give players more information about what was happening, right?
Right.
On one hand, I like to try that because maybe you take that same situation if we gave that player enough information about if we gave that veteran much more information about that player that took the truck and they saw the profile and like, okay, well, I guess this is a new player and they haven't done anything else bad. Okay, maybe it was an honest mistake. I'm gonna let go. But they don't know, right? They might be like, man, this person, they're just like a griefer, right? Because we get a lot of those reports too, right? Where we will look into something and we'll realize that, man, this was just a misunderstanding. That happens probably like a large percentage of the time. That is what happens too, right? So it's like, but we can't blame players for it because it's not their fault for feeling that way. We can only blame the game for not giving them enough information, right? So that's the other angle that we like to take, where it's where give people more information to have less misunderstandings, right? And then so it's like before you even get to that point of like let me hit the report button, right? And certainly we have to work on that. What happens when you hit the report button? Absolutely, but why isn't the best in general? Isn't the best way is to be less focused on the reactionary side of things and be more focused on like the proactive side, which is those things that I just talked about, right? So it's both. It's both. It's not one or the other. It's not. This is you obviously understand this is a complex topic, right? So
I honestly, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but then you go to something like the communication system, right, where that is intrinsically, it's like built to be the most reactive thing ever. Someone says thing, and there's an up arrow and a down arrow right there, and it's like begging to be voted on. So I mean, and then so like that's like so like in an instant, someone can get downvoted to oblivion, and hey, sometimes they deserve it, no doubt about that. But let's just get on that topic. Without going into specific cases, what's your current assessment on the comms rating system?
yeah, so I mean we're working on it just like everything else.
Of course.
I think that it has room for improvement. I think one misunderstanding that players have about that system is that it's just this button that you can use to like instantly affect someone, but I can't get into details for very obvious reasons, right? But there is a
Well,
lot that goes under
sorry,
the
sorry.
hood.
It may not be obvious to me, but the reasons being like gaming the system, or
Yes,
okay.
right. So, but it is. There's quite a few things that happen behind the scenes there, and it's not like there's yeah, it takes into consideration a lot of factors. So it's not like this free reign. I'm just gonna go and like obviously if it affects certain players and those players are they're never gonna feel like it's fair, right? But having said that, I'm not saying that it's perfect, and I'm not saying that
Of course.
there aren't
Right.
people that are affected that shouldn't have been. But I will say that like it's not this free reign button that I can use to just go and like shut someone down by just spam clicking all their messages. That's maybe I'll leave it at that.
You don't
Yeah.
think it can be easily trolled? Like, let's say there's someone who is, just giving orders out, not being too argumentative, and I can't get 5 of my guys to troll them with all the downvotes, and then they're just silent
Yeah.
for the rest of the war. You don't think that's you don't think that's able to be done?
That was heavily. Let me just say that was like heavily heavily considered when I can't talk about the algorithm or anything because,
Right.
but that was heavily considered. Yeah. So
Are the, again, stop me with what you can and can't talk about, but what are the ways someone with a bad rating system can redeem themselves, if at all? Is it just time, or is it just they got to start local first, or what is the intended way? Like, because obviously, if someone's in a bad spot,
the thing, you
okay, go
know,
ahead.
this bad spot that you're talking about,
Mm.
the comms rating. So, um, the only thing it does is you can't talk in global chat.
In world chat, right?
Just to be clear, you're
Just
completely
that.
able to talk in your, well, and the map posts, right?
Okay, yes.
So it's like you're still able to talk in voice chat. You're still able to talk to the region. You're still able to talk local, and
How about logistics?
and yeah, I'd have to check on that one, but I believe that's covered because otherwise you can just circumvent. It'll just
Right. So
ruin the
logistics and
logistics channel,
intel.
right?
So it's
Yeah.
logistics,
So any of the
intel, world,
global,
and map
yeah,
posts.
anything that is global, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and another thing that is it's it's one of those things that anyone who's affected that's going to hear this is just going to get upset. But
Yeah, of course. I mean,
I
that was
can't,
going to happen no
like,
matter what.
I can't not be honest about it, right? But to be honest about it, it impacts a very, 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 very small number of people. And all the people out there that's affecting is going to hear this and they're going to be like, Mark's a liar because it's everyone, right? Because they're going to cite,
Well,
themselves
yeah,
and,
of course they're going to make that
right?
argument.
Right? They're going to be like, everyone is, this is the worst. And, like, again, it's not perfect. And, like, there are times when it's going to cause some players to not be able to talk in a global text chat. They can play the game. They can do literally everything else. They can drive vehicles. They can do everything else in the game. It's going to cause this, and they will get their rating back up, right? Um, and
Yeah. So, like, what is the
maybe
path
I'll
to
just leave it at that.
redemption?
Yeah.
Not maybe not the path, but okay. So you agree that what if someone's in a bad spot, they shouldn't be in that spot forever. There should be a way
No,
to get out of
they
it,
shouldn't
right?
be. There should be a way to get out of it, and they shouldn't be hard. And
You don't think it's difficult?
let me say, we're we're going to we're gonna we are working on that part, right?
Okay.
So we are working on making that part smoother, right? But I do have to emphasize, just because, maybe not everyone understands how it works. It's affecting of, like, I can't stress how it's it's hard to contain my laughter because when I look at the numbers, it's just like everyone's outraged about this, right? And and then when um and then for that small number, they can't talk in the global text chat channel and they can't make a map post. And I know that's, I'm not like, see, I don't want people to hear that and think like, well, Mark doesn't care that I was,
Silenced.
in that this had affected me and has ruined my game. I absolutely sympathize with when that happens, which is why we're working on trying to smooth over those those parts, right?
You can still. I think it's safe to say
So
you can still lead, very much so, without the global text chats. But at the same time, I do think
yeah.
there does need to be more done to clarify, or a path out. Because right now, the only outlet once you well, I take that back. Actually, I
I
was going to
agree.
say
Okay, so
the only
no,
outlet
so
you had is
yeah.
Reddit, but no, there's a lot more outlets you can still communicate.
Yeah, so I agree. So I agree that there are some issues with, like, you can certainly recover from it. Um, but I agree that there are some kinks in that part of the system that can be improved. But and we're working on that part, right? So it's yeah, it's that's yeah.
Foxhole is a massively multiplayer online war simulator. It is a social game, so I think that's where we'll have to leave. We could go back and forth for hours. And I'm actually going to bring in one of the victims of your censorship right now. No, yeah, we're going to have to end it there because no one cares about Melee. I care about Melee. But and there were actually a lot of good suggestions for topics, but we have hit the 1 hour and 10 mark. So we got to end it there. But Mark, thank you so much for your time as usual. It sucks that we can't get the community a direct line to the community in terms of that live call-in show, but hopefully this will be a good stopgap for now. In the meantime, and
yeah, for sure, we'll get back to it in about a month, or hopefully like
right when 1.0 comes out, right? Next month.
Yeah, it's just
confirmed.
It's
no.
I'll have a better answer soon, but it's just all I can say is, man, it's so hectic right now. It's just we're just all heads down working. It's a crazy time at the studio. So
okay, yeah. Hey, Mark, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. See you.
The PressCorps is a non-profit creative collective of artists, reporters, and players from the MMO video game Foxhole by Siege Camp. Our mission is to engross our audience in and amplify the stories of this unique war ecosystem. The PressCorps was founded in early 2018 by former PlanetSide 2 Radio Free Oraxis host Captain in Arms. It is a separate community entity and is in no way representative of Siege Camp. For more information, visit the PressCorps Discord through the link below.